Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, please join me to welcome the Right Honourable Liz Truss, Member of the UK Parliament and former UK Prime Minister, with a warm round of applause. 各位贵宾，我们一起热烈的掌声来欢迎英国前首相特拉斯下议员。Welcome. Please have a seat. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the special speech of the Right Honourable Liz Truss, Member of the UK Parliament, hosted by the Prospect Foundation. My name is Grace Huang, your MC for today. Former Prime Minister Truss has long been a staunch friend of Taiwan. During her tenure as UK Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Developmental Affairs, the UK government expressed the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait on numerous occasions and affirmed that the UK has clear interests in ensuring peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And today, it is a pleasure and an honor to be joined by Ms. Truss. To kick off, I would like to welcome Chairperson of the Prospect Foundation, Dr. Chen Tangshan, to give us the opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Dr. Chen.
Former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the Right Honourable Liz Truss, Member of the Parliament, Honourable Mr. of Foreign Affairs, my good friend Joseph Wu, Honourable former US Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issue, Kerry Curry, Honorable former Japanese State Minister of Defense, Yasuhide Nakayama. Esteemed guests and colleagues, good morning. It is my great honor to welcome the former Prime Minister to Taiwan at this real crucial juncture. We understand it has been over a year since the outbreak of the Russo-Ukrainian War. The unwavering resistance of the Ukrainian people and the sustained support from democratic countries around the world have helped contain the authoritarian aggression. Here in Taiwan, we also face similar threats by an increasingly aggressive People's Republic of China. Beijing's military intimidation continues unabated as it seeks to establish a new normal in the Taiwan Strait. Air and naval incursions across the median line have increased significantly since last August. Besides military actions, the PRC's use of information warfare, economic coercion, and the gray zone operations also challenge democracies worldwide. Xi Jinping's recent visit to Russia also is a clear demonstration of the two authoritarian countries' deepening cooperation and a serious warning to the democratic world. During her time in office, Prime Minister Truss urged Western allies to provide more support to Taiwan to ensure that Taiwan has the ability to defend itself. So during the tenure of Foreign Secretary, she had already shown great support for Taiwan. So we are grateful for her long-standing commitment to Taiwan. Today, the United Kingdom is leading the international community to confront authoritarian challenges. The United Kingdom is the second largest provider of military aid to Ukraine. It is also the first country to provide long-range weapons to Ukraine. Additionally, the British government approved a sharp increase in exports of submarine parts and technology to Taiwan last year. So at a time when democratic systems face severe challenges, we believe that action always speaks louder than words. The United Kingdom has shown that supporting Ukraine does not mean diverting support from Taiwan, and that supporting Taiwan is not a distraction from supporting Ukraine. This is really a wise words, really wise words. So as Prime Minister Truss pointed out recently, I emphasize this point. So once again, I and the people here in Taiwan, thank you very much, Prime Minister Truss. So we are all very, very happy, looking forward to your speech. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Please be seated. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite President of the Prospect Foundation, Dr. Lai Yi-zhong, to introduce today's keynote speaker. Please join me to welcome Dr. Lai.
Thank you. I see a full pack of house here. Very excited about listening to the speech from the Right Honorable Ms. Liz Truss, the Member of Parliament, for her remarks. The speaker that we are going to hear needs no introductions. Right Honorable Ms. Liz Truss has been in long service in public services, and before becoming the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, there are several posts that she held, including the Foreign Secretary and also the State Secretary for the International Trade, among others. But I think the people in Taiwan remembered her the most is that she consistently demand and ask for the attention to the security and stability across the Taiwan Straits, especially the time that the voice for raising awareness of the situation here wasn't as pronounced as it is today. And it's also very hard for Taiwanese people to remember that right after Liz Truss left her post as a Prime Minister, she continued to voice the support for Taiwan and continue to argue that the people, especially in Europe, need to come to rise for the defense of Taiwan and help Taiwan to defend themselves. So that right now, when we are experiencing the Chinese pressure, even today, that the airplane and the vessels still surrounding Taiwan, and also disinformation, including Prospect Foundation, under this tremendous attack, and probably some of you already know about the news last night. And also, we are continuing being sanctioned by Communist Party, including me, so that we have all those experience and feelings. And it's no better time that we have great friends, Liz Truss from the United Kingdom, to come here to give a welcoming and very heartening encouragement. So let me present to you the Right Honorable Ms. Liz Truss, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and also member of the Parliament of the United Kingdom. Please.
Wait, just move this. Chairman Chan, President Lei, it's fantastic to be here today in Taiwan at the Prospect Foundation, which has done so much to stand up for freedom, democracy and security here in the Pacific and also in Taiwan. I've always wanted to come to Taiwan, but as a government minister, I was heavily restricted. And maybe we can all blame that on President Nixon, I don't know, but it's great to be here. Because this place really is it really is a beacon of freedom, of democracy, of free enterprise, of a free society. But it is also on the frontier of freedom in what is now a very serious struggle between democracies and authoritarian regimes around the world. You here in Taiwan know what the threat is, and you know what the alternative is. It's tyranny instead of freedom. It's control, not choice. It's arbitrary decisions made rather than proper justice. And the reason you know what that threat is only 80 miles away, there is a totalitarian regime where that is a reality. And the threat that poses is not going away. In fact, that threat is increasing. Recently, President Xi has stepped up the threats. He's made statements about so-called reunification. He's been sending increased numbers of warplanes on sorties into Taiwan's air defense zone. And the Chinese Communist Party are making it very clear that they don't want to see Taiwan exist in its current form. And that's because you are a direct challenge to everything the Chinese Communist Party stands for. People here in Taiwan are better off than they are in mainland China. They're freer than they are in mainland China. And they're happier than they are in mainland China. In fact, according to the World Happiness Index, there are a full 37 places higher in terms of happiness than mainland China. Now, the reason I've come here this week is I am a huge admirer of Taiwan and the Taiwanese people. I want to do all I can to help ensure your continued success. I want to increase awareness of the position that you find yourselves in. And I'm also here because I believe that this is the most consequential place in the world for what is the most consequential struggle of our time. If you look around us here in Taiwan, you can see this island democracy is thriving. Under the brave leadership of President Tsai and the rule of law, we see state-of-the-art buildings, we see new industries emerging, we see modern technology and innovation. We see exports from Taiwan going around the world, whether it is semiconductors or bubble tea. You are having a huge impact right across the globe, and you're powering the modern economy. 90% of the world's most advanced microchips, 60% of mobiles, laptops, and computers all have content produced here in Taiwan. And the shipping routes that surround Taiwan are absolutely vital for global commerce. If you look at the performance of the Taiwanese economy, 3.2% growth on average every year since 2013. Well, I can tell you many countries in the West have a lot to learn from Taiwan, where we in our economies have seen an increase in regulation and an increase in the size of government. In Taiwan, what we see is free enterprise powering a very successful economy. You show us all the potential that free democracies have, and you also show the importance of freedom and self-determination in delivering and being a successful nation. We can see what happens when that freedom is taken away, because we saw that when tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square in 1989. We've seen it in Hong Kong, when liberties have been eroded with the imposition of the national security law. And in Xinjiang, we have seen appalling targeting of Uyghurs, with reports of forced sterilization, forced labor, and the arbitrary detention of over 1 million people. The human cost is huge, and it is terrible. We cannot allow those attacks on freedom to happen here. And I know that if freedom in Taiwan was threatened, that the people of Taiwan would stand up and they would fight. But you also need allies across the free world who are going to back you up. I am one of those allies, and I know that you have many, many friends right across the free world. I believe that the biggest danger to the future of Taiwan is fatalism. Not on your part, but a fatalism in the free world, that somehow a Chinese takeover of Taiwan is inevitable. Some suspect that President Xi is waiting to subdue the enemy without fighting, as the military general Sun Tzu once put it. It is vital that such a notion should not be aided and abetted by any of us living in free democracies. And I believe it's completely irresponsible for European nations to wash their hands of Taiwan on the grounds that it's a long way away or it's not a core part of our concerns. I don't think they could be more wrong. It is a core interest to the people of Europe. A blockade or an invasion of Taiwan would undermine freedom and democracy in Europe, just as a Russian invasion of Ukraine, a successful domination of Ukraine, would undermine freedom and democracy in the Pacific. You only need to look at recent statements by a European Chinese diplomat repudiating the independent existence of the Baltic states to see that these two theatres are inextricably linked. I'm concerned that Ukraine should not be forced into some kind of unfair settlement by China. And I don't believe we should be giving China leverage over European security. In fact, we should be fast-tracking Ukraine's entry to NATO and providing Ukraine with all the weapons they need to make sure that Russia is pushed out of their country. And I'm also concerned that any compact might make it harder for us to defend Taiwan. All free nations must commit themselves to a free Taiwan and be prepared to back it up with concrete measures. And I'm going to talk later in my speech about what those measures should be. Ladies and gentlemen, the future of Taiwan isn't just important for the people on this island and in this room. It's important for the future of the world, because where we are today, in Taipei, is on the front line of the global battle for freedom. The Chinese Communist Party is engaged in an ideological struggle with the free world, and they have been very open and clear about that. They see our way of life, our way of operating, as a threat. And they're openly in league with some of the worst regimes around, in the world, whether it's Putin's Russia, Iran, or North Korea. This is a battle of ideas, as much as it is an attempt to gain power on the global stage. Let's remember that China is a totalitarian regime that actively describes the US and its allies as an empire that they want to see the end of. China is now the world's largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity, and what it wants to do is use this position to gain dominance. Now, there are many in the West who say we don't want another Cold War. But we have to be clear that this is not a choice that we are in a position to make. Because China has already embarked on a self-reliance drive, whether we want to decouple from the economy or not. China is growing its navy at an alarming rate and is undertaking the biggest military build-up in peacetime history. They've already formed alliances with other nations that want to see the free world in decline. They have already made their choice about their strategy. The only choice we have is, do we appease and accommodate that strategy, or do we take action now to prevent conflict? Last summer, the new British Prime Minister described China as the biggest long-term threat in Britain, and he said that the Confucius Institute should be closed. He was right, and we need to see those policies enacted urgently. The UK's integrated review needs to be amended to make it absolutely clear that China is a threat. Confucius Institutes in the UK should be closed down immediately. Instead, the service could be provided by organizations with the support of Hong Kong nationals and Taiwanese nationals who've come to the United Kingdom freely. We also need to make sure that we rule out the resumption of the Economic and Financial Dialogue and the Joint Economic and Trade Commission, because we cannot have more integration with the Chinese economy. Recently, there have been too many mixed messages from the free world. We need to end that ambiguity. This is because there are still too many in the West who are trying to cling on to the idea that we can somehow cooperate with China on issues like climate change as if there's nothing wrong. As if there are bigger issues than Chinese global dominance or the future of freedom and democracy. But without freedom and democracy, there is nothing else. We know what happens to the environment or to world health under totalitarian regimes that don't tell the truth. You can't believe a word they say. Look at what's happening in terms of carbon production. New coal-fired power stations are being fired up as we speak. And in China, local governments approved more coal power in the first 3 months of 2023 than they did in the whole of 2021. China did not keep its promises on Hong Kong, and crucial liberties have been eroded. Chinese officials speak of the Sino-British Declaration of 1984 as a meaningless historical document, despite it being a legally binding declaration which is registered at the United Nations. And during the COVID pandemic, they refused to reveal what was going on within their shores, exacerbating the problem for the whole world. But despite the evidence, some in the West continue to turn a blind eye for one simple reason. And that reason is economics. They're determined to try and cling on to the failed globalist model that's driven what people consider to be easy growth in Western societies. Until the recent inflation crisis, we had relatively low prices and regular reductions in prices, often driven by cheap imports from China. We also saw significant investment into our economies. Of course, it hasn't been easy for industrial parts of Britain producing goods like steel or ceramics that have found themselves undercut by goods with state subsidies or by intellectual property theft. And what I saw when I was in government is how the Treasury were very reluctant to take a tough line on China, wanting instead to have economic financial dialogues, wanting to have trade talks. And Britain is not unique in that respect. Treasuries and finance ministries across the West are keen to engage with China because they're driven by business interests who don't want to give up lucrative Chinese investments or exports to China. And what we've also seen is self-censorship by companies who are worried about pushback from Beijing, including, in particular, parts of the film industry. But in the free world, we have to face the fact that that economic model isn't working anymore. China is becoming more self-reliant, and Western economies are struggling with the balance we've got. We've got to do things differently. And in doing things differently, I think we should listen to the people who are in the know. And the people in the know are people here in Taiwan, or people in Eastern Europe who are forced to live next door to an authoritarian neighbor. They understand how great the threat we're facing is. I'm not surprised that it's our brave Lithuanian friends who are prepared to withstand China's attempts to undermine their commerce. Or the fact it was the Polish Prime Minister who recently spoke out against those in Europe who would seek to appease the Chinese Communist Party. What do we need to do collectively to deal with this challenge? We need to remember how these regimes are successfully taken on. And they're not successfully taken on by accommodation, appeasement, or from adopting a position of weakness. They're taken on through strength. What does that mean? Well, I've talked before about the idea of a network of liberty, of free nations working together. Because let's be honest, we can't rely now on the UN Security Council, which was recently chaired by Putin's Russia. And we can't rely on the World Trade Organization to make sure fair trade rules are in place. That is why we need to find other alternatives to get things done. What I want to see on the economic side is the development of an economic NATO. Coordination between countries that support freedom and proper free enterprise. During the Cold War, we had the Coordinating Committee for Multilateral Export Controls, which was focused on how the free world collectively dealt with the USSR. I believe we need something similar to that. This would be an organization that had proper ministerial representation and the right policies in place to agree the best approach towards China. The best approach to take on technology exports, the best approach in the event of economic coercion, the best approach on trade and investment. Now, there's a very obvious group of countries that could get together to do that. And that's a group of countries that have already put sanctions on Russia that I was proud to take a lead on as Foreign Secretary and as Prime Minister. This group includes the G7, and it includes the EU, but it could also include South Korea, Australia, and other willing parties. We could also use trade agreements and trade pacts as a stepping stone to uphold freedom. I'm very pleased that the United Kingdom has now joined the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, a vital geopolitical as well as a vital economic agreement. Now, Taiwan applied to join the CPTPP in September 2021. I would be delighted to see that happen. Not only would it boost UK-Taiwan trade, which already stands at £8.6 billion a year, but it would also help further build economic links for this important democracy. I want the UK to champion the fast-tracking of Taiwan's accession in collaboration with key members of the CPTPP. It is also vital that China is blocked from being a member of the CPTPP, and I encourage the United Kingdom government to say this publicly, as well as governments in Japan and Canada and our other allies. As well as working together and having an economic NATO, which is vital for taking on the economic coercion and attempts to dominate by China, we also need to work more closely together on defense. We have NATO, we have the Indo-Pacific Quad, and there are various other discussion mechanisms. But fundamentally, we need a more coordinated approach, in particular to make sure that Taiwan has the defense it needs and is able to defend itself. We cannot pretend that we have meaningful deterrence without hard power. And if we're serious about preventing conflict in the South China Sea, we need to get real about military and defense cooperation. That's why I believe initiatives like AUKUS are so important, and we've just seen AUKUS announce its plans to deliver a nuclear-powered submarine for Australia. GCAP will enable the UK, Italy, and Japan to work together on the next generation of fighter jets. And we also need a coordinated approach on what exports we license to send to Taiwan. I know the US is already providing military aid to Taiwan as well. But in order to do that, we need to understand the situation on the ground. Too much policy is made without talking directly to Taiwan. And in particular, we need to make sure that representative offices around the world are able to have those conversations and are able to have the status needed to be able to engage in those discussions. The third thing we need to do, as well as more economic cooperation and more security cooperation, is to reduce dependence on China in all spheres. I've already talked about the need to not engage in new economic dialogues or further cooperation with China whilst it takes the aggressive stance that it has been taking. But we need to keep aware of all eventualities. If Beijing keeps its word and escalates aggression towards Taiwan, substantial decoupling will be unavoidable. If we fail to prepare for this, the consequent economic pain will be felt by all of our people across the free world. I know that when we first put sanctions on Russia, when I was Foreign Secretary, there was a lot of resistance from organisations in the UK who were deeply embedded already with Russia. We need to be on the lookout for that with respect for China and take action now to make sure we're prepared. The final point I want to make goes back to what I said at the start about the economy and economic growth. Because we're not going to beat China economically by becoming more like China. We need to make sure that free democracies have small governments, lower taxes, and less bureaucracy so people want to invest in our countries. And we need to be able to reach out to third countries, many of whom are in the undecided camp, with a strong economic proposition. This is where I think we, in the UK and right around the free world, can learn from thriving economies like Taiwan, who are getting that economic model right. Because we're going to have to do significant economic reform at home to make sure we are match fit to take on these authoritarian regimes. Finally, it's been a huge honor to come to Taiwan and be able to talk to you about the future of freedom. I'm clear that we have to do all we can to support free democracies like Taiwan in the face of aggression from a Chinese regime whose record we already know. We in the West have a collective responsibility, not just to do the right thing by Taiwan, but also to hold China to account for its actions. My visit this week is enabling me to communicate directly the solidarity that British people feel for the people of Taiwan. Taiwan really is a shining beacon in the Pacific. It's an enduring rebuke to totalitarianism. It's an example of the power of free enterprise, and it shows the importance of a free society for human happiness. We in the United Kingdom and right across the world need to do all we can to support you over the coming years. Your future is our future. Thank you.
Thank you once again to Ms. Truss. Ms. Truss, please remain on stage for the panel discussion. Thank you once again for your strength and also your staunch support of Taiwan and also of democracy. And with that, we will proceed to the panel discussion today. And now I'd like to invite the president of the Prospect Foundation, Dr. Lai Yi-zhong, former U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, Kelly Curry, and also former Japanese State Minister of Defense, Yasuhide Nakayama, to come up to the stage for the panel discussion. Let me now give the floor to Dr. Lai. 我们工作人员可不可以递麦克风给我们的赖博士？
I'm sorry. Suddenly, I could not find it. I just hide in the plain sight, so I did not discover it. So we all listened to the Ms. Liz Truss' very encouraging and heartening speech for Taiwan. Clearly demonstrated the solidarity of the British people with Taiwan for the freedom and democracies. And now we are going to have a very exciting discussions with two other distinguished guests on the panel to accommodate already a very exciting speech by Ms. Liz Truss. So the first one I'd like to introduce is former U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues and the U.S. Representative at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, Ambassador Kelly Curry, and to share with us about her few thoughts. And then will be followed also by another very distinguished guest. I think the Mr. Nakayama Yasuhide, the former Vice Minister for Japan's Ministry of National Defense. Yeah, thank you. So Ambassador Kelly, please.
Sure, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here in Taiwan today on this very auspicious occasion and to hear former Prime Minister Liz Truss speak to the people of Taiwan, but also to the world about the importance of this place. I think this is a landmark occasion, and it's the latest in a series of incredibly important visits and visitors that Taiwan has hosted over the past year, and continues to show, I think, the growing importance that the world is placing on engagement with Taiwan. And it's just another yet another marker of how much this situation continues to evolve. So I'm very honored to be here, and many thanks to the Prospect Foundation and to the government of Taiwan for hosting us today. Last October, I was here in this very same room for the World Movement for Democracy session. The National Endowment for Democracy, on which I'm on the board, had hosted, it was one of the first big events to be hosted here in Taiwan after the COVID restrictions were lifted. And I saw firsthand that growing democratic solidarity that you spoke about this morning, where we're seeing this incredible linkage between Taiwan and Ukraine, the Taiwanese people and the Ukrainian people. We had a number of leading Ukrainian civil society activists, as well as a number of European leaders who had been very active on advancing freedom and democracy in the region, come here and have an extraordinary visit with their Taiwanese colleagues and receive an extraordinary welcome. And yesterday, I also went to the National Human Rights Museum here in Taiwan. And I was really moved to see not only this incredible testament to the growth and development and the ongoing struggle that Taiwan faces with its democracy here and how the progress that Taiwan has made. And this museum is a really fitting symbol of that. If you have not been to the Human Rights Museum, I highly encourage you to go. It's very moving. But what was really remarkable is that there is an enormous exhibit at the National Human Rights Museum of Taiwan on Ukraine that was brought together by the Ukrainian community here in Taiwan, especially led by women, who put this incredible exhibit together at the museum to highlight the links and show the relationship between what has happened in Ukraine and the fate of Taiwan's future and democracy. So it was very, very moving, and it really, I think, is a strong example of how this connection has played out over the past year. And it highlights these shared values that you spoke of around democracy and freedom. And I think that this is where we see that our most enduring and effective partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, whether it's with Japan or South Korea or Australia or New Zealand, or most relevantly here today, Taiwan, it's because we do have these shared values of democracy, human rights, and freedom, and we believe in these things. And I think that we're seeing this growing sense in Europe. We've had so many visitors here from Europe recently about Taiwan, about the importance of Taiwan. It's just been unprecedented. We've even had sitting ministers come to Taiwan from Europe, and I think even the U.S. government could take a hint from that and start sending some sitting ministers, our equivalent secretaries of our departments here, to have meetings with their Taiwanese counterparts and really start to continue to build these linkages. I think the alternative to what we're seeing, where Taiwan welcomes and embraces visitors and doesn't ask anything other than solidarity from its visitors, with Beijing asking and demanding that the United States ignore its own dignity and security in order to secure meetings with Chinese officials. The contrast, in my mind, could not be more stark, and shows that, again, that we need to really rethink about how we deal with both the People's Republic and with Taiwan. I think that it was really important when Dr. Chen noted these gray zone tactics that Taiwan has been really subjected to. And as democracies, we have all really struggled with these gray zone tactics that China employs against countries that it claims to have friendly relations with. These coercive, corrupting, and covert kinds of activities that we see, whether it's in our economic, educational, or political spaces. We've now seen incidents in Canada, in the United States, and across Europe of Chinese interference in political affairs. We've seen this in the Pacific Islands, direct interference in elections, and here in Taiwan, where you are facing an election next year, and we are facing major elections next year in the United States, we expect to see, again, exponential growth in this kind of political interference. And this is where we can all learn more from one another, where we have an opportunity. As you said, we need to talk to those who know best. And Taiwan has been on the coalface of dealing with this kind of political interference from day one. So we have a lot to learn from how Taiwan has dealt with these challenges, how you've dealt with it from your civil society, how you are continuing to evolve tools to be more resilient when it comes to disinformation and misinformation campaigns. I think about your wonderful Minister of Digital Affairs, Audrey Tong, and the incredible work that her ministry is doing, as well as civil society organizations like Doublethink Labs that are incredibly creative and innovative in the way that they are documenting, identifying, and dealing with misinformation campaigns at the social media and public level. So there's so much more we can do together. And I remember the slogan from the pandemic that Taiwan can help. And I really, I've always taken that to heart because I do think that Taiwan can help and Taiwan wants to help. And this is such a great contrast to what we see from the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ambassador Kelly, for your remarks. Particularly, especially in the last part, you talk about the gray zone tactic by China on Taiwan. Yes, that we experience every day and still experience right now. So next, I'd like to invite Mr. Nakayama for your remarks.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me here. The precious time for me to attending this gathering. And I'd like to special thanks to Dr. Tan San Chen, the president of Friendship of Abe Shinzo Association, because I belong to Abe's faction. And on behalf of the soul of Abe from the heaven, I really appreciate to invite me here with his soul. And also, I'd like to thank you for the Joseph Wu, the foreign minister. He always kind to me, and we are not a friend, we are brothers. Yes. And also, thank you very much. And also, I'd like to thank many of you, but I might finish my introduction. And also, thank you, Dr. Lai. I am a politician, but I never lie. I'm always talk straight like Ms. Truss. And today, I saw a very good collaboration between the UK former Prime Minister Liz Truss and Truss plus Taiwan tea. You can say trust. So the real trust today exists in Taiwan. And so thank you very much. But I'm sorry, I learned English by myself from Hollywood movies called Beverly Hills Cop 1. So you can know my age and also generation. And I'm sorry, my English is not better than UK from or American people. So and also the foundation make a reservation for a good hotel. The American hotel, everything is a very big size. And but I couldn't sleep yesterday because I'm nervous to write speech in my Japanese, and I think how to translate this script, maybe ChatGPT or something. But I don't trust AI, because AI for communist China is not I for Japanese means love. AI for China, it's an artificial island. So I don't trust AIs, so I supported by Google Translate. So thank you. So anyway, I think when the Second World War ended, the Chinese President Chiang Kai-shek said, it's a virtue to repay a grudge. It's a famous story. And Japan was saved by his speech. And thanks to you, we were able to create post-war peace and economic prosperity. Once again, I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the people of Taiwan. And it has been 78 years since President Chiang Kai-shek gave this speech. 4 years after this speech, on October 1st, 1949, the country that was founded was the People's Republic of China, a one-party dictatorship of the Communist Party. In other words, Japan fought in World War II against Taiwan, led by Chiang Kai-shek, not against China, led by Mo Zedong. how do you go to war with a country that didn't exist during World War II? And after that, world had a big political contradiction. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida visited Taiwan in April 1952 after signing the San Francisco Peace Treaty. He will conclude an finite treaty between Japan and the Republic of China, the Sino-Japanese Peace Treaty. After that, President Nixon, which Liz Truss-san mentioned, President Nixon visited the People's Republic of China in 1971, and the normalization of relations between the United States and China began. After that, as you all know, Taiwan was expelled from the United Nations and is now in the current situation. I think that everything is connected. A democratic country treated Taiwan, a democracy country, coldly, and normalized diplomatic relations with the one-party dictatorship of the Communist Party with a different principle and political ideology. In other words, the problem we must pool our wisdom to solve today have paid off as a result of the contradictory, deceitful, and ill-conceived decisions of politicians 80 years ago. I think that is what it is today. We are experiencing the East-West Cold War structure. When the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, there was a feeling that the Cold War was over, but I didn't think so. I thought the Cold War structure would go underground. Given the current situation in Ukraine, I strongly believe that Russia's unilateral aggression should not be tolerated, and I don't think we should allow China-Russia collaboration. Unfortunately, I would say that China and Russia collaborating on all fronts. As you know, Russia is conducting a military invasion of Ukraine. In short, in view of the current situation that the permanent members of the United Nations are violating international law, I think the significance of the United Nations' existence in the first place will be questioned. The permanent members themselves, which should show the example among the United Nations member states, express that there is a need for UN reform in various ways. I'd like the permanent members to correct their colors and strive for the United Nations to be reformed and improved in the right direction. Now, discussions are moving forward to set up a NATO secretariat in Japan. The Chinese Communist Party's spokesperson has expressed their intention to oppose this, but I think that they are making the right decision. When the Chinese official said, this is bad, we think this is good, this is good. Thank you. Japan, I think I better to speak without this script. I don't trust the Google translation either. My political gag is better. Japan does not have multiple countries like NATO to counter the traditional threat of Russia, but Japan alone. China, North Korea, and Russia facing the three fronts and building a security system must be established and maintained, of course, under the Japan-US Security Treaty, or our alliance with the United States is solid. But I believe that the alliance will only work if we have a strong will to protect our country with our strength. More 3 paragraphs. compared to about 80 years ago, human beings have not changed in modern warfare, but technology has changed and evolved. We must also respond firmly to new combat domains that differ from traditional combat domains such as space, cyberspace, and electromagnetic warfare. 90% of the oil resources that come to Japan from the Middle East pass through Taiwan's Bashi Channel. Similarly, 60% of natural gas resources is imported to Japan through the Bashi Channel. Considering the economic aspect, Taiwan's geopolitical importance is Japan's lifeline. Taiwan is an inseparable brother country and family to Japan, as I said. I believe that the time has come for democratic countries to make up their minds to protect democratic countries and their people. Thank you very much. ありがとうございます。
Thank you, my other brother, Mr. Nakayama.
Thank you.
Thank you for your speech and remarks. So right now you can see that on the podium we have 4 countries: Taiwan, that's me, and the United Kingdom, United States, Japan. So we have a new quad right over here. So let's start with this. Since right now that there is a G7 meeting in Japan that's going on. And first I'd like to pose a question to Ms. Liz Truss, that were you still a prime minister right now, what would you say at the G7, especially on the issue about Taiwan, according to many of the suggestions that you have?
Well, as I've just outlined in my speech, I think the most urgent thing that the G7 need to do is coordinate economically to take on Chinese economic coercion. What we're seeing is we are seeing bullying on a major scale taking place across the international arena. And yes, it's on trade and it's on trade retaliation, but it's also on investment. You can see that with the Belt and Road Initiative. We can see it with other economic agreements that China is entering into with third parties. And I think there is a window of opportunity for the G7. And if you add the G7, the EU, and our other allies that have put sanctions on Russia, that's over 50% of the global economy. There is an opportunity now for us to take very serious action to deal with that Chinese economic coercion. I fear that that opportunity may not be here in 5 or 10 years' time. So it's the urgency and the coordinated nature of the action that is what is required. And the G7 and other allies need to push on with that as soon as possible.
Let me just add a little further. If you are still Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, and supposedly if the G7 right now is held in United Kingdom, would you invite, for example, my good friend Joseph Wu to be there? Since they are going to talk about Taiwan cases, why not just let Taiwanese, we are our own agent, talk about on behalf of ours? How would you think about that suggestion?
I do think we need to look at the whole issue of Taiwanese representation, because what is happening at the moment is that China is using it as a tool to undermine Taiwan and to try and lessen the space that Taiwan has to make its voice heard. And I think we need to think strategically about how we take that on, because at the moment they are trying to, the Chinese Communist Party are trying to pit free democracies against each other, and we simply shouldn't allow that to happen. This is why I go back to the point of the UK cannot act alone on this. I've got my views, the Prime Minister's got his views, but this is much bigger than the United Kingdom being able to take unilateral action. I mean, we've seen some very brave examples of unilateral action We were talking earlier about our friends in Lithuania, who stood up to Chinese economic coercion. But if it is going to change the behavior of Beijing, it has to be collective. And what we don't have, and I know this from being part of the G7, is the G7 doesn't have a secretariat. It doesn't have a sort of permanent footing. It's a useful collection of leaders, ministers, but in order to carry something out like coordinating on economic coercion, we need a much better and more permanent structure. And this is why I allude to the export committee that used to exist. I think it was disbanded in 1994 because we all thought the Cold War was over. Sadly, some of the relics have continued, but that is the type of organization we need, in my view, to actually make things happen.
Thank you. And also thanks for reminding us that such export committee that existed before, that can be taken as a vehicle to address the economic security issues. So the next I'd like to ask Ambassador Kelly Currie. As you see that on the podium, we have 2 male and 2 female. So that I believe that we can claim at least we have a gender equality at this moment. Although I'm not going to say that I'm much of the representative here. But I think since the United States, and you also talk about the disinformation that the Taiwan and also the world is facing. And one of the key issues is that the democracy is a very open system. And basically just lend itself to exploitation of the authoritarian system like China and also Russia. We exploit it. Both United Kingdom and the United States has experienced the kind of disinformation campaign by Russia, and Taiwan especially by China. So what would you suggest that how we're able to collectively deal with this issue? Any thought about this?
Well, I think that we have struggled because we are open societies, and it has been a huge struggle for democratic open societies to balance the need to identify and call out and try to block these disinformation campaigns and these efforts while maintaining their democratic values and their openness. And this is something that Taiwan does have a lot of experience in, as I mentioned before, and we can learn lessons. I think one of the best lessons that I've learned and seen from how Taiwanese society deals with this is through humor. Using humor to beat rumor is what one of Audrey Tang's mottos that they use. Because one thing that you find is that totalitarian and authoritarian systems don't do well is they don't do humor well, and they aren't very good at understanding how to communicate in really in ways that are normal in a democratic society. And so it's in a way it does make it easier for us to see what they're doing because it looks odd. There's always something slightly off about it, like the jokes don't quite hit, they use slang incorrectly or not at all, and so it's not that hard to really identify when these things are coming out in social media, for instance. It's what do we choose to do about it, and I think that we're struggling, and we've got to get more, I think, solidarity across democracies and setting some common standards, using tools like the former COCOM that Ms. Truss talked about that set technology standards but are for the new age. The challenge for us also, though, is that technology moves so much faster than government and regulation can. And so educating people in these countries, making sure they are aware and that our societies are more resilient through that kind of training and education, just as, we have to learn how to, do math and science and read books. I think that in this new era of social media literacy, we have to understand how to recognize disinformation and be resilient to it. And so we have to actually look to the young people who are digital natives and who grew up in this environment. Like, I don't I couldn't begin to tell you how to operate most of this stuff. But my kids, my 16 and 14-year-olds, know exactly, and they're really good. Like, they can tell when something is not right, and they're much better at identifying this stuff in social media than even I am. So I think we have to really use the inherent tools of our democratic and free societies and leverage those to push back against these authoritarian efforts to influence us.
Yeah, thank you. When you talk about your 16 and 14 years old, about their literacy about the social media, it also reminds me about, I have the two kids, similar age with yours, but one of them is complaining to me that right now the Chinese TikTok and the Little Red Books is very, very popular, even among the Taiwanese youth. And some of their recognition about the effect being heavily influenced by those. So sometimes you get from them, there's a very different perception about the social media and the education that they have through those means. Some people argue that we need to have a greater limitation or restrictions about those means, especially employed by China. But some people suggest that due to the youth, they should be able to work on their own, so we should not try to limit it too much. What would be yours response to those?
Well, I think I have an ongoing argument with my 16-year-old about TikTok. And it was very interesting that after the hearings, the big hearings in the United States about TikTok, he immediately started, like within a couple of hours, and he was in school all day during the 6-hour hearing, and yet by the time he got home from school an hour later, he seemed to know everything that had happened in the hearing, but as if it had been fed to him by the TikTok public relations team. And so we had to sit down and have a conversation about this. And because I know about this, and it's part of my work, I was able to have that conversation. But I do worry that TikTok is, I actually am in favor of banning TikTok in the United States, because I think it has proven to be it's so compromised. It is so clear that the way in which the company is managed, that it is loyal to the Chinese Communist Party, that it is controllable, even if it is not currently controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, it can be, and that it has been a powerful source for disinformation and for influence operations. And so I do actually think that we should take the example of India and ban some of these apps that are clearly not intended to uplift and benefit our society in a meaningful way.
Yeah, thank you. And then my brother, Nakayama-san, I think that you are probably one of those first pioneer. First in Japan, talks about Taiwan contingency is Japan contingency. Of course, that had been advocated very loudly by former Prime Minister Abe. Later on, I think this motto has been replicated elsewhere, whether that is the Korean president, as well as the U.S. Secretary of State and even Philippine president, talks about the issue on Taiwan will be the issue of the world concern. So it's not just about the regional, it's not just about Taiwan, it's about the whole world need to be attentive to what is happening here. But then people still argue that, especially in Taiwan, frustrated about the lack of the Taiwan-Japan security cooperations. Being the Vice Minister for the National Defense in Japan, what would be your suggestion to address these issues?
Thank you for a very good question. And so we, the Japanese people, are thinking Taiwan is very important geopolitically. But on the other hand, as you mentioned, Doctor mentioned that free, open Indo-Pacific, the geopolitical strategy is more macro covered, the way of thinking when you look at the maps. And all the country who showed to the others that we are Democrat, we have to unite, and also so that's why after Abe assassinated and Kishida now become the prime minister of ours, and South Korean president also has been changed. Before, the former one was always against Japan. And the new president of United States is now trying to make South Korea and Japan try to unite. And so we actually, the Democratic side, doing some cooperation activity even in our regions. But what we are afraid about, because the one question before, okay, this weekend we are going to have a summit meeting, G7 summit in Japan. And if I am a prime minister, I will invite Joseph Wu as my friend. And when the Beijing, some argue or tackling our attitude, we don't afraid of it. Because now we understand what's happening next, symmetrically, if you look at the Ukraine situation, and our part, the next, tomorrow's Ukraine, become Taiwan. So why we always excuse somebody or someone who is invisible? Why Taiwan cannot come to the United Nations and speak loudly their opinions? Think about North Korea, South Korea. They are both countries in the United Nations. North Korea fought against 16 countries when they entered the United Nations. How about Taiwan? Taiwan has a lot of friends. And even the UK former Prime Minister is here today. Why we have to excuse? So I think if you would like to change the dialogue, made the decision 80 years ago, we have to fix this contradiction. What is a democracy? What is autocracy? What is a communist? Don't forget the Cold War, but it's memory. But if you try the future, not happening again like that Nazi or autocracy activities, we have to stand and unite under the geopolitical map of the balance. And now Putin, how do you close the war in Ukraine? If I'm Putin, I cannot say I'm surrender. Everybody knows. So I'm so sure that one day he will put the button of the nuclear weapons. Because without that activity, he might be assassinated by somewhere in space, from the drones, whatever. And we have to think the reality of not the politics, but it's kind of like a gambling of the politics, not to put money in, but the leaders' lives already in. I'm already thinking about why Abe-san assassinated. Who did it? It's a religious cult leader or somebody who against that policy? I don't know. But who got the profit when Abe passed away? Especially in this region, ASEAN country, Asian country, who get the profit? So I really think that who are you excusing somebody? I want Taiwan become more open widely, directly make opinion and decision making, come to every sector, World Trade Organization, WHO. Why the Chinese Beijing always ijiwaru suru, how do you say that, push off the Taiwan? It's a health issue. Taiwan actually reported to and rescue all over the world. Don't forget. So I hope that Taiwan will become one of the state member of the United Nations, officially, not observer. Thank you.
Thank you. I think what you said, especially at the end, that every Taiwanese people's hope that we can actually go into the United Nations. Also remember that year 2021, the Secretary of State, the Blinken, also mentioned about the meaningful participation from Taiwan, not just in certain international organizations, but in the United Nations system itself. So we hope that can be the reality someday. And I know the time is very short. It's a very wonderful discussions. With that in mind, I remember last year at this time that the people were worrying about the Ukraine, that today will be Thailand tomorrow. But today, people probably were thinking about, yeah, Ukraine's about to win, then Thailand tomorrow will win as well. So that meaning, the same sentence, but meaning completely different. But thank you very much for all the very insightful and very interesting and also very encouraging remarks by all of you. So please join with me and thanking for our great panelists and for giving us very insightful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Lai, for leading an insightful discussion. Last but not least, I'd like to invite the panel to stand up for a group photo. After a selfie. All right, so please stay on stage. We have our photographer here. All right, I'd like to... And finally, I'd like to invite Foreign Minister Joseph Wu and also Chairman of the Prospect Foundation, Dr. Chen Tangshan, to join us on stage for one last group photo. All right, so please look at the cameras in the first row, and then we have friends from the media in the back. 好，我们待会也会请台上的贵宾看向这个我们场后方的媒体朋友们。All right, we have a lot of friends from the media who are here with us today, so please do look into their cameras. So please wave.好的，请问各位媒体朋友们，是不是都已经捕捉到今天的画面？ All right, please hold for a few seconds for the press today. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much once again to all the guests today. So ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the program for today. Thank you once again for your participation. And we'd like to thank once again our panelists and also especially former UK Prime Minister, Ms. Liz Truss, for joining us today. And please do not forget to take your belongings with you when leaving. So thank you once again. 好，我们今天的演讲会呢，就到此告一个段落。非常谢谢各位的与会。大家在离开的时候也请记得您的随身物品，谢谢，非常感谢。